This video will explain a little more in depth how join-in-progress games work. In the video that I explained how to schedule sports, I covered how to do a join-in-progress using this example from November 11th, where we have a Cowboys basketball game that is going to join a Westwood One NFL game in progress. And you do that by replacing the playlist that normally loads for the Cowboys game, so it will prepare a JIP at the appropriate time for the appropriate game. But in this video, I wanted to explain a little more in depth what is actually going on here. If we take a look at this normal playlist for University of Wyoming men's basketball, that is just UW men's basketball. This playlist is the one that goes into deck 6 on the AV SAT screen. It goes over here on deck 6, and it's the playlist that actually activates the game when you start it. So you can see here what it does is it loads the remote control. So it is listening to the Learfield relays. It loads your legal ID up into deck 2. It loads the format for the local breaks into deck 1. And if we look over here a little further, it loads into deck 7 a playlist that ends the Wyoming Cowboys basketball and goes back to regular programming. That is what the normal playlist, and of course, indicator 8 and 23, what those do, they'll switch the Learfield audio onto the satellite screen, and then 23 switches the satellite screen so it's on the air. So that's what this normal playlist does. If we load the join-in-progress version of it, there's a couple little minor variations. Of course, it'll still activate the game. It still loads the remote control. It loads the ID and the format. If we look over here, it loads a join-in-progress version of the end playlist. And then everything else is the same except for down here where we have a time started command that replaces the playlist in deck 5 with whatever you want there for the next game that's going to start. And that is how it avoids doing the time started commands for the next game. In this case, we had that Westwood One NFL game scheduled for 8 o'clock with the macro to prepare it at 7:59. So 1 minute before the macro starts, if this playlist is still loaded, because one of the things that happens when the game ends, of course, this playlist gets unloaded out of those decks. So if this playlist is still loaded at that time, it means the game is still on. And so at 7:58 p.m., this time started command will execute, which replaces the normal playlist in deck 5 with this. And so by doing that, it removes those 8 p.m. time started commands out of there. So that playlist is no longer loaded. And instead, it sticks this in. And this is a fairly simple playlist. If we load this join-in-progress Westwood One NFL, you'll see that what it does is it just basically switches the NFL game on. It waits a couple of seconds for a few things because the normal Cowboys ending playlist is going to be doing some stuff at the same time, and I don't want it to conflict with commands trying to happen simultaneously. So it waits a couple of seconds, and then it just executes the macro and starts deck 6 to fire off the Westwood One NFL game. Then, of course, it loads the regular deck 5 playlist back in. So if we look at the, let's go back to the University of Wyoming men's basketball join-in-progress and look at the ending playlists here. This is the join-in-progress version of that. Let's just go ahead and copy that, and let's load that into here. Actually, let's load the normal version first. This is normally what happens. This is the playlist that loads into deck 7 when you're doing a Cowboys game normally. It removes the remote control, so it's not listening to any satellite relays. It switches audio back to the normal modes, and then it loads the normal decks back into the satellite screen, clearing off deck 2, 6, and 7, and replacing the format in deck 1 with the normal playlist that's in there that allows you to start local games and stuff. The join-in-progress version of that is end UW men's basketball join-in-progress, has a couple other things. It waits a little bit before it does some things. It also starts deck 5, and that is how it would activate the game. And of course, this playlist never has to be modified because it always starts deck 5, and what you're doing is you're changing what goes into deck 5 with that load list 5 command in the JIP playlist that you modify. So it starts deck 5. Now, this would cause some kind of odd behavior if the game ends before the JIP is supposed to occur, but it doesn't really hurt anything. What it ends up doing is just starting that playlist. So if we go to FMNOV 11 if the game ends before 7:58 p.m., it's going to go ahead and start this deck, but all that does is just start the comment line, which doesn't do anything. It just advances it on the playlist, and then you don't see it on the screen over here anymore, but no harm done there. But if that playlist has been replaced with the Join in Progress Westwood One NFL, then it starts this deck and switches to the NFL game. So it works either way. It works if the game ends before the join in progress is supposed to occur. If that happens, then it just goes ahead and ends normally. The time started command at the bottom of that JIP playlist never happens. If it, of course, happens after 8 o'clock, then this playlist has been loaded into Deck 5. It starts this playlist, which activates the Westwood One game. And then, of course, from that point on, everything works normally. Now, the downside of this is you can't do two JIPs back-to-back. Like, you can't have the Westwood One NFL game join in progress another game after it, because this can only do the standard loading stuff. It can't replace that playlist. It doesn't know what time to do it. Technically you could program to do it, but the programming would get about 3 times more complex, and you would have to go through and modify a lot more playlists. So I've kind of just cut it off. Like, if you're going to do one JIP, that's good. If you're doing 2 JIPs, my philosophy is you're trying to cram too many into a single station. So just, if you've got that many JIPs, put one game on the AM and one on the FM and do it that way. But anyway, that's, I think, a fairly detailed explanation of how the join in progress stuff works. Of course, there are versions of this for every single game that you can run. So there are a lot of playlists already. I mean, that programming is already somewhat complex, but you don't have to modify any of these other than the daily playlist, which you're modifying anyway, and then the JIP one for what game is going to be started, which is a fairly simple thing to change. So if we do that again, this is the only other playlist you would have to modify for a JIP. And of course, what you're doing here is you're just telling it before the macro is scheduled to happen, get that playlist out of there and replace it with a playlist that just starts that specific game. And I did want to clarify something here. In the other video, I said you can only have one of these a month. That isn't really correct. In fact, it's kind of misleading. What I actually meant to say is that you can't program this particular men's basketball joining another game in progress until after this one has already run, because if you do that, you're changing this playlist. And so if you have 2 Wyoming Cowboys games that are going to join another game in progress this month, you have to wait until this one has completed before you can modify it again for the next time it gets used. You of course can do another JIP. You can do a Westwood One NFL game that joins a men's basketball game in progress. That's fine, because that's a different playlist. But this particular playlist can't be modified until 11/11 now, because if you do that, it won't work properly on 11/11, because this is the programming for that day. So I think that is, I kind of misspoke there a little bit. But I think that's pretty obvious. Like, if you're loading this playlist to join something in progress on November 11th, then that's what this is programmed to do. And if you try to program it for a day like on November 20th, before the 11th has come around, then obviously you can't do that, because the 11th hasn't happened yet. So that's why I put that date in there. That way, if you're loading this up, you're like, oh yeah, I can't do that yet. I've got to wait until after this game is done to program that JIP. Just make a note on your calendar after the 11th that you can go ahead and program that any point after this date has passed. All right, hopefully that is clear, and if not, you know where to find me. But that's how join in progress games work.